Monotype.
Welcome to Creative Characters by Monotype, the show where we meet the people working at the intersection of type and everyday life. I'm your host, Carl, and today I'm here with my good friend, Cadley. Hey, Cadley.
Hi, Carl.
Cadley, I just saw you in person for the first time in like 7 months.
I know, we were just together like 24 hours ago. I'm sad that we couldn't record in person.
Yeah, now we're sitting here on this virtual recording studio. I'm trying, quite frankly, to stay awake because it was a busy week.
Yeah, we were together almost 24 hours ago in person, and now I'm recording the podcast from my bedroom in Denver, which is silly. Yesterday, I was leaving Boston to come back to Denver, and it felt like one of those first summer kind of mornings. I walked to the train station to head to the airport. It was 70 degrees, sunny, green. Everything was popping, the lilac trees, and it just really felt super fresh.
And then you slacked me and you're like, I'm sorry to be leaving on such a nice day. And I was like, give it 24 hours and it'll turn crappy. And boy, did it. It's 40 something degrees and drizzly today. But summer is nevertheless coming.
It's actually pretty warm in Denver. So last night I actually went out for a bike ride and was it feels like full summer here. I'm ready.
Beach season is coming, and we were kind of looking through old episodes recently, and we have a lot of really great guests that talked a lot about how the ocean influenced their work or how their work directly reflects the culture of seaside vacation towns, and thought it would be a fun way of kind of ushering in the new season.
Yeah, the ocean and the beach is just such a magical, kind of mysterious, and also, I don't know, it just has a lot of nostalgia. Everyone has a feeling about it, whether you're a beach person or not, summer person or not.
Now, you live in Colorado, which is not a beach state, and grew up in Western New England. So was the beach a big part of your childhood, or was it more of a special occasion?
Definitely more of a special occasion thing, because I grew up in Vermont, so yeah, still a landlocked place, but I was more of a lake girly growing up. But yeah, we made summer trips to Maine, spring trips to South Carolina. So yeah, I feel like if you grew up in New England, not near the ocean, you're always trying to get to it. Yeah,
well, and I grew up going to the Jersey Shore every summer, and the Jersey Shore will feature prominently later on in this episode. So for me, it was a really formative part of my upbringing and my personality, and still a place I go to when I need to clear my head or just kind of take a break from whatever. Our first guest on this sort of compilation episode is actually quite a distance from either of us. I think it was season 2. We talked to Andrew van der Merwe. Sorry, Andrew, for still not being able to pronounce your name. Andrew lives in South Africa, and he is actually pretty well known on Instagram for doing calligraphy on the local beaches. His handle is Beach Scriber, one word, and he does just amazing calligraphy in the sand with a variety of tools. A lot of them are sort of unexpected, wiry contraptions that lend really interesting texture and line work to what he draws or writes. I had a really fascinating conversation sort of getting into why he does it and how he got started and some of the other work he's done with traditional calligraphy. And it was, one of those conversations that kind of surprised me for its depth and what a compelling character he was.
Yeah, his work is very mesmerizing. It's also powerful to me just with the philosophical elements, just being outside and doing something with your hands. That's something we tell people all the time. It's just if you're stuck creatively, go make something.
Yeah. So let's start there with Andrew and his first memories of drawing letters and forms and how it led him to do what he does today.
Some of my earliest childhood memories are of my very first writing lessons. And we got started off with pencils. And some of my very earliest memories are of that tactile feeling of the pencil going hard and soft over this grainy paper. And I remember the effect of pressing hard and pressing soft to get thick and thin lines. And I also remember the wonderful feeling of this beautiful teacher and her long hair falling over me onto the desk while she gave me gold stars for my writing. I think that probably sealed my fate as a calligrapher. I think it goes back to my childhood, really, where I first discovered the tactile, amazing sense of what the sand does when you touch it in interesting ways. So I grew up in a small town called Port Alfred in the Eastern Cape, and I spent a lot of time on the beach. And I would pick up pieces of driftwood or shells, whatever had been washed up on the beach. And I discovered that if I touched the sand in the right kind of way, I got a more interesting mark than if I just scratched the sand with a stick or my finger. While I was a child, I played with letter forms, copied them in amateurish ways, even before I ever saw a calligraphy textbook.
My own son, who's 10, whenever he does a greeting card or something for someone's birthday, it's getting the lettering correct and making it look interesting is a real focus of his. So I wonder if that's kind of a universal experience.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's kind of primal, actually. If you think about how writing came to us, it just had to have been through humans initially making marks in sand, because early humans would have lived by reading tracks made in the sand. And that's how they would have hunted. There's a whole science to that. And I reckon it's just a very small step from there to making those marks deliberately in order to communicate. The humans probably did that for millennia until they started making marks on cave walls with pigments.
So you went to university for, I believe you said, philosophy, politics, but you came out as a calligrapher, or you eventually became a calligrapher. So where did that shift sort of happen for you?
I actually dropped out in the last semester of my degree. I ran out of money. It just became too difficult for me working on the side and trying to write deep philosophy essays. So I then got myself a job working for a non-governmental organization which fell foul of the apartheid government. And we had the security police knocking on the doors late at night and intercepting checks and stuff like that. And eventually it folded.
Oh, wow.
And I ended up on the street.
Oh, wow.
And I'd been already freelancing calligraphy to some extent just to help try and pay my way at university. And so I just started freelancing full time at that point. But I think the thing I should really be telling you about is how that led to the beach calligraphy. A friend of mine who had seen me writing on the beach, gave me a small pottery tool, which consisted of a piece of flattened looped wire at the end of a small handle. And I immediately thought, that could make a cool mark on the sand. So I took it with me to the beach, and yeah, it did, but it needed some adaptation to work for calligraphy, I thought. So I went home, and maybe the next day even, I went back with a thing that I now call the beach wand, which is a longer stick and something that makes more of a calligraphic mark in the sand. It's a piece of flattened wire, diamond-shaped point, and it pulls through the sand and just basically rucks the sand up in a beautiful way. And I was playing with that in the sand, and there was this moment which was really pivotal for me. If I pulled it through quickly enough, it threw the sand out and left a V cut in the sand, which was reminiscent of carvings in stone in ancient Rome. So there was that incredible poetic juxtaposition of having a mark that looked like it was done in stone, but was completely ephemeral. It got washed away by the next wave. That captivated me and is probably the main impetus behind what followed with the beach calligraphy. I'll never forget a moment when I picked up a stick which had a piece of bark bent off to the side, and that piece of bark pulled like a plate underneath the sand and pushed the sand up from underneath. And it does that in a sort of a rhythmical way. It's just really beautiful. In fact, beach calligraphy cannot be done in the same way you do lettering. I make a clear distinction in my mind between lettering and calligraphy. I see lettering as something that is constructed, drawn, preconceived. Whereas calligraphy, well, the thick and thin of the line comes from very directly from the tool and the angle, the way that it's moving on the page, the pressure with which you're applying the pen. An arced stroke comes from an arcing movement. A straight line comes from a particular way that you pivot your hand and your arm. With beach calligraphy, it's an even more essential part of the art because you're having to whip a load of sand out of the floor. And you simply cannot do that in a halting step-by-step process because the sand will just fall out of the tool and land in the letters and mess everything up. You got to actually cut through the sand in a swift manner that catches the sand up into the scoop and then dispose of that sand. You got to get a good rhythm up and step right. It definitely is a dance. If the sun is really low, for example, a carved mark, a carved line, also has a tiny little ridge running around its edge. And when the sun's really low, you have the whole letter in shadow, but that tiny little ridge glowing in the sun. Another thing that grabs me is a cut that has water seeping into it from below. It's like it becomes illuminated by the reflected light from the sky, and then if the wind blows on it, you get miniature little ripples running through the letters and dry sand falling into it. The wind working on letters carved among dunes, they often look so much more beautiful than when they're still fresh and raw. Yeah, that's very much part of the intoxication of it. When I work on the beach, I often do a thing over and over. And I often have to do it over and over because most of the time I'm working in the surf zone. So between sets, which can be 5 or 10 minutes, I'm having my work washed away. But I don't take that as a frustration because what the ocean is doing there is it's giving me a clean slate, an opportunity to try again. I just can't help being reminded of an incident that I've had happen to me actually on more than one occasion. Somebody walking up to me doing my beach calligraphy and saying to me, "Why are you doing this? Don't you know that the tide's coming in?" It's a valid question. I often do stuff on the beach that only I ever see. But yeah, I think that you have to be immersed in it to really start to discover the real value of doing something that's not there for show, to be hung on a wall or placed on a pedestal as a sculpture. Just something that's there for you to enjoy in the doing of it.
So that's really what I love about Andrew's work. And obviously he can take a photograph and post that for the world to see, and people love it. But so much of his work is really just between him and himself. He does it for the joy, the practice, the refinement, the excuse to be by the ocean. And it's just a reminder of how valuable sort of the act of creation is to a person's well-being. And it's really a big part of what makes us human, I think.
That's really beautiful. Yeah. And just making work for the sake of making and being present.
Well, and like as kids, you make sandcastles, you do, everyone digs those tunnels and holes and stuff like that. And you sort of do it with the knowledge that it's not going to be there the next day. Either the tide's going to wash it away or the truck's going to flatten it out. And it's sort of like that's easy to get lost in that act of making something where there's really nothing at stake. It's there for as long as it's there and no longer. And that almost frees you from being too obsessed with perfection or other people's opinions or whatever. Sometimes I wish more of life was like that.
Me too. Absolutely. Carl, you live near the ocean, as we said, and you grew up near the ocean. What's your favorite part about going to the beach with your family? I
mean, my favorite part of going to the beach with my family was always basically getting ice cream every night. Whenever we're on vacation, we would just my dad would just throw all pretense out the window and we would get ice cream every night. I think my favorite aspect of going to the beach as an adult is probably that it's always the same, but also always different. It's the same shoreline, the same landscape, the same rocks, whatever. But depending on the day, the sea could be smooth as glass. It could be, chaotic. There's so much change, but it still retains some core sameness. And so it's at once familiar and comforting, but also you never know what to expect fully. What about you?
I mean, I'm a big swimmer. So okay. I really just love to swim no matter what the temperature is. Like growing up, we'd go to Maine, like I said, and the water can be really cold there, but that's never stopped me from jumping in. So yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's just really mesmerizing. I feel like it brings like an immediate sense of calm and like peace. And when we were all in Miami for Adobe Max, that was something that like the majority of people from Monotype were doing in the morning. Like we'd all go out to the beach in the morning individually and run into each other. It's like we were going to have our little moment of zen in the morning by the ocean before going into a chaotic work day. And it was like really amazing having that there. That's not something that you usually, or that I usually have access to, just go and enjoy.
Yeah, I felt quite spoiled. It was really nice. For most of us, our memories of the beach are rooted in the summertime when we're on vacation with our family, school's out, we're just sort of soaking up the sun and enjoying it. But the beach doesn't go away. It's there in the wintertime. We've had 2 guests on the show whose work really focuses on that period of time, that space between sort of the highs of summer, and that explores the quieter and often deserted months of autumn and winter.
So first, we're going to take a quick trip to the British seaside with Justin Burns. Our creative director, Graham Sturt, had him on the podcast, and they talked about Justin's exhibit that focuses on how type in the British seaside towns creates meaning and contributes to placemaking. So here's what Justin had to say about the exhibit.
The exhibition was really almost a day trip to the seaside. So as you wander around these things, the smells of fish and chips, suntan lotion, salt and vinegar, candy floss. So it's a really visceral experience that really overloads your senses, really. It's noisy, there's lots of lights, it smells. I think it's those points where it's either so busy you can't move in these places when it is a hot day, to you can walk down the promenade and there can be very few people there. I like that contrast of what the seasons do to the place and how we respond to the place. These spaces look very different in autumn and winter than they do in the summer. So it's obviously in the summer, they're very populated by people. I like the way that the weather can alternate this as well.
This idea of seasonality is a major theme in the work of Tyler Haughey as well. Tyler was a guest, I believe, our first season, and a fellow Jersey resident like me. And I was always a big fan of his photography, which really focuses on that kind of liminal space between summers where beach towns get a little weird even because they're so empty and quiet. And it's really a side of that world that most people don't see. In Tyler's case, his work focuses on some places that I grew up going to, so it was very personal to me. And it was a real privilege to get to speak with him way back in, I'm being told, 2021, which, Cadley, is crazy that we've been doing this ridiculous show since 2021.
I know, it's funny that because that's actually right when I came on to working on the podcast.
Yeah.
This was one of the first, if not the first episodes that I helped write the blog post and everything. And
yeah.
I also ended up visiting one of the places that his photography focuses on,
That's right.
Wildwood, and I got to see a lot of the places in real life for myself, and I dragged my whole family around, and I took a million worse photos than he did of the same places. So
yeah, well, and Wildwood in particular, Tyler, his work goes up and down the East Coast, even up to New England and Maine, stuff like that. But his work in Wildwood is just so interesting because the vibe there is straight out of like the 50s or a Bruce Springsteen song or kind of like every sort of New Jersey cliche you can think of. But it looks a lot different in the off season than in peak July. And so he's really exploring the question of, what happens when nobody's around? What does it feel like and look like? And, it's that idea of playing with the familiar by showing it in a very unfamiliar context. So his work, I love it. I find it so compelling and personally, has a lot of resonance with me. So here's a clip from my conversation with Tyler way back in 2021.
I grew up down the Jersey Shore in a town called Wanamassa, New Jersey, just outside of Asbury Park. So we grew up very much in that shore culture, beach culture. You know, summertime was obviously a huge thing. And then the off season, so much changes. You'd go hang out in these towns that are right along the beach and it would feel so entirely different than in season.
You mentioned to me previously that your father was a union sign painter. So curious if you want to talk about how that influenced how you took in your surroundings and if that sort of played into helping you focus in on a particular subject matter for your photography.
It definitely plays into it, whether even, on a subconscious level. Growing up, my dad worked for a company called Central Jersey Sign. He was a union sign painter. He did a lot of side jobs too, and he made the sign for my nursery school. And it was a lot of these just kind of, colorful text, vinyl on wood or vinyl on, sheet metal. I distinctly remember going down in the basement and he had this nice big easel and all these like cool tools that just felt so foreign to me as a little kid, but would help him peel back the vinyl backing and use the X-Acto knife. I don't know how aware of this I was, but when it came to what am I drawn to when I'm out shooting, I'm drawn to these bold, colorful signage or just like roadside kind of vernacular structures and expressions.
From a storytelling perspective, what are you trying to show to the world that you feel like might be missed if not for your eye?
What drew me to it originally and what still plays a part in my like kind of exploration of these places is this like idea of the space between the fantasy that these places conjure up and the reality of these places. I think more ambiguously, it's kind of playing too into like the memory of these places. How even these like memories can go from very familiar and recent and tangible. And then as you get further and further away from that summer vacation, they kind of turn strange and they kind of take on this like fantastical element to it. And you're not really sure, like, wait, did that happen? Or like, was it really that sunny? Like you kind of just, I think the nature of memory is this kind of like, it just becomes less and less specific over time. But so playing with the space, like in between that transition too, of when a place goes from really familiar to less specific. It's almost like the place as we want it to be versus the place as it actually is. And it plays back into escapism. We're obsessed with like separating out leisure from life or, the rest of life, work, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So I like how far we're kind of willing to go to do that.
I think what separates your work from pictures of signs and something that's more universal is this idea of vacation and like what vacation is in a person's life. It's not a story that's unique to the Jersey Shore or any particular place, but it's this idea of you as a person or as a family, you show up in a place on a given day, you stay for your length of time, and then you leave. And that length of time is your experience of that place. So whether it's the Jersey Shore or it's Paris or it's a lake in Minnesota, you show up, you experience, you leave, and then the place freezes, right? And it stays the same.
Yeah.
And if you go back, you kind of go back with the expectation that it's going to be exactly like you left it. But I think what your work shows is that that's just not realistic. These places exist outside of your experience, that they change. And the things that you're documenting in your photography are things that feel permanent, but are not.
I've honestly been thinking a lot about this, the idea of what are other people's versions of the small details and memories that I remember from these locations, like as a kid. And I think in order to depict that, you rely on the classic imagery and the tropes that have kind of come to define these areas, right? And I've been interested in trying to find these ways to show, like, are these places like being built or destroyed? Like this kind of in between flux of, are they improving or are they deteriorating? Like, is this heading out of season or is this coming into the season? And I think that to kind of leverage those specific feelings like we were talking about, or the memories that we were talking about. And then also like the tropes and the myths, right? Of like, you know, this fantasy and everything's kind of this like idealistic, perfect, like vacation summer life. Through those tropes, like you can explore what's really going on underneath the surface.
A good chunk of your photography is done in the off season. That's what really drew me into your work, because your photography is bringing people to these places to see these familiar signifiers when they're not supposed to see them.
Yeah. So this like seasonal disintegration, right? So like I grew up working at beach clubs. I was the assistant manager of the Deal Casino Beach Club. I wear it with pride. And come Labor Day weekend, it would close. It felt like an abandoned film set. Like people just like up and they're like, all right, well, see you next year, you know, like time to leave. They'll leave like their lockers full of towels and chairs. And so it's kind of this like decline, and I'm into like what remains, you know, like what's left. And I think early on it was much more like, what are these buildings looking like when they're empty? But now I'm also like, what do you find in these locations in December, in January, in February? Yeah, the off season, I think, kind of shows like what it's like really like in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's kind of strips away the beach towels on the railing and all these other kind of artifice, and just becomes more familiar, at least familiar for somebody who kind of grew up there. So it's this like displacement from like the idealism of summer.
Well, I don't know about you, Carl, but I'm feeling very summery, and I'm now feeling like I need to fly back east and get back to the beach with you guys.
Yeah, not today, but maybe in a few weeks. Listening to these conversations, you know, I'm reminded of how much fun we've had recording this podcast, and I really hope that we've brought some great conversations to people over the years. And also, yeah, I'm ready. Bring it on. Summer in New England is buggy and humid and crowded, but nothing beats golden hour at the beach.
And there's ice cream. You can get ice cream every night if you want now. You're an adult.
I mean, I'm not going to say I never have gone on like a 3 or 4 day streak. If my son had his way, we would have it like every day, like for dinner.
Wouldn't we all?
So that just about wraps up this episode. And I say just about because we have hidden a little Easter egg at the very end of this episode. If you want more late 90s Jersey weirdness, stick around for a very odd story. It's mine, and it kind of messed me up as a kid a little bit, but nothing bad happens. But don't say you weren't warned.
Thanks for listening. If you like our show, please subscribe, rate us, and share us with a friend. If you'd like to listen back to any of the episodes we featured here, check out the links in the show notes of this episode. Creative Characters is brought to you by Monotype. It's produced by Christopher Olin and Mia Sullivan. We'll be back in a couple weeks.
So Tyler, real quick, my Asbury Park story.
Oh yeah, what do you got?
1998, Vans Warped Tour. I'm like 17 years old. So I'm down there with a couple of my friends. We're roasting all day at the show and getting, you know, our heads bashed in at seeing these ridiculous bands. I think we bailed around 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening and went out to the boardwalk. I think we found something to eat. And out on one of the jetties, we saw a guy who looked like he was fishing. And we were like, let's just walk out on the jetty, whatever. So we get out there, and no shit, this guy had a ferret on a string, and he was taking the ferret, throwing it in the water. It would swim around, it would catch a fish, and he would reel it back in.
Way.
And this memory is now so distant in my life that I find myself like not believing it. And I've checked with my friends, like, that really happened, right? Like, we saw the guy with the ferret. And they're like, oh yeah, that really happened. And the ferret's name was Budweiser.
No fuck.
Because he said when he like got the ferret, and this guy was like, he had lived a life. You know, he was probably in his like late 50s, you know, tank top, the whole thing. And he was drinking beer. He said that when he got the ferret, it got into some beer and he thought it was going to die and it didn't. So he named it Budweiser and blah, blah, blah. Hand to heart. He would take the ferret, heave it in the water.
So many questions.
Bring it back. I mean, I don't have answers.
I know.
That's all I got. That's all I got.